Hi guys, before we start chapter number 2, let's recall what we learned in chapter number 1, that is tracing changes through 1,000 years. So who is a cartographer? Cartographer is a person who makes maps. Then let's see. Hindustan, for example, today we understand it as India, the modern nation state. When the term was used in the 13th century by Minhaj-e-Suraj, a chronicler who wrote in Persian, he meant the areas of Punjab, Haryana and the lands between the Ganga and Yamuna. He used the term in a political sense for lands that were a part of the dominions of the Delhi Sultan. The areas included in this term shifted with the extent of the Sultanate, but the term neighbor included South India. By contrast, in the early 16th century, Babur used Hindustan to describe the geography, the fauna, and the culture of the inhabitants of the subcontinent. As we will see later in the chapter, this was somewhat similar to the way the 14th century poet Amir Khusrau used the word Hind. While the idea of a geographical and cultural entity like India did exist, the term Hindustan did not carry the political and national meanings which we associate with it today. And a simple term like foreigner. It is used today to mean a person who is not an Indian. In the medieval period, a foreigner was any stranger who appeared, say, in a given village, someone who was not a part of that society or culture. In Hindi, the term Pardesi might be used to describe such a person, and in Persian, we use Ajnabi. A city dweller, therefore, might have regarded a forest dweller as a foreigner, but two peasants living in the same village were not foreigners to each other, even though they may have had different religious or caste backgrounds. Historians rely on coins, inscriptions, archaeologists, and textual records for information. But there is also considerable discontinuity. The number and variety of textual records increased dramatically during this period. They slowly displaced other types of available information. Through this period, paper gradually became cheaper and more widely available. People used it to write holy text, chronicles of rulers, letters and teachings of saints, petitions and judicial records, and for registers of accounts and taxes. Manuscripts were collected by wealthy people, rulers, monasteries, and temples. They were placed in libraries and archives. So, what is an archive? Archive is a place where documents and manuscripts are stored. Today, all national and state governments have archives where they keep all their old official records and transactions. There was no printing press in those days, so scribes copied manuscripts by hand. As scribes copied manuscripts, they also introduced small changes, a word here, a sentence there. These small changes grew over centuries of copying until manuscripts of the same text became substantially different from one another. This is a serious problem because we rarely find the original manuscript of the author today. On occasion, authors revised their chronicles at different times. The 14th century chronicler Ziauddin Barani wrote his chronicle first in 1356 and another version 2 years later. The two differ from each other, but historians did not know about the existence of the first version until the 1960s. It remained lost in large library collections. At different moments in this period, new technologies made their appearance, like the Persian wheel in irrigation, the spinning wheel in weaving, and firearms in combat. New foods and beverages arrived in the subcontinent: potatoes, corns, chilies, tea, and coffee. Remember that all these innovations, new technologies, and crops came along with people who brought other ideas with them as well. As a result, this was a period of economic, political, social, and cultural changes. This was also a period of great mobility. Groups of people traveled long distances in search of opportunity. The subcontinent held immense wealth and the possibilities for people to carve a fortune. One group of people who became important in this period were the Rajputs, a name derived from Raja Putra, the son of a ruler. Between the 8th and 14th centuries, the term was applied more generally to a group of warriors who claimed Kshatriya caste status. The term included not just rulers and chieftains, but also soldiers and commanders who served in the armies of different monarchs all over the subcontinent. A chivalric code of conduct, extreme valor, and a great sense of loyalty were the qualities attributed to Rajputs by their poets and bards. Other groups of people, such as the Marathas, Sikhs, Jats, Ahoms, and Kayasthas. It's a caste of scribes and secretaries. They also used the opportunities of the age to become politically important. Changes in their habitat, that is, the habitat of the agricultural people, they forced many forest dwellers to migrate. So, what's the meaning of habitat? It refers to the environment of a region and the social and economic lifestyle of its residents. Others started tilling the land and became peasants. These new peasant groups gradually began to be influenced by regional markets, chieftains, priests, monasteries, and temples. They became part of large complex societies and were required to pay taxes and offer goods and services to local lords. As society became more differentiated, people were grouped into jatis or subcaste and ranked on the basis of their backgrounds and their occupations. Ranks were not fixed permanently and varied according to the power, influence, and resources controlled by members of the jati. The status of the same jati could vary from area to area. Jatis framed their own rules and regulations to manage the conduct of their members. These regulations were enforced by an assembly of elders, described in some areas as the Jati Panchayat. But Jatis were also required to follow the rules of their villages. Several villages were governed by a chieftain. Together, they were only one small unit of a state. Delhi Sultan Ghiyasuddin Balban, in a Sanskrit Prashanti, praised him as He was the ruler of a vast empire that stretched from Bengal, Gauda in the east to Gajana in Afghanistan in the west and included all of South India, Dravida. People of different regions, Gauda, Andhra, Kerala, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Gujarat, apparently fled before his armies. Historians regard these as exaggerated claims of conquest. Amir Khusrau went on to explain that in contrast to these languages, there was Sanskrit which did not belong to any reason. It was an old language and common people do not know it, only the Brahmanas do. By 700, many regions already possessed distinct geographical dimensions and their own language and cultural characteristics. When the Mughal Empire declined in the 18th century, it led to the re emergence of regional states. But years of imperial pan-regional rule had altered the character of the regions. Across most of the subcontinent, the regions were left with the legacies of the big and small states that had ruled over them. This was apparent in the emergence of many distinct and shared traditions. In the realms of governance, the management of the economy, elite cultures, and language. Through the thousand years between 700 and 1750, the character of the different regions did not grow in isolation. These regions felt the impact of larger pan-regional forces of integration between without even quite losing their distinctiveness. So they had their own distinctiveness, even if there was a larger pan-regional forces of integration. Still, they had their own distinctiveness. Collective belief in a supernatural agency, religion, was often closely connected with the social and economic organization of local communities. As the social worlds of these groups altered, so too did their beliefs. It was during this period that important changes occurred in what we call Hinduism today. These included the worship of new deities, the construction of temples by loyalty, and the growing importance of Brahmanas, the priests, as dominant groups in society. Their knowledge of Sanskrit text earned the Brahmanas a lot of respect in society. Their dominant position was consolidated by the support of their patrons, new rulers searching for prestige. One of the major developments of this period was the emergence of the idea of bhakti, of a loving personal deity that devotees could reach without the aid of priests or elaborate rituals. They do not need any rituals, and they do not need any aid from the priest. So it just need is a loving personal deity that devotees could reach. So, what is the meaning of patron? Patron is an influential, wealthy individual who supports another person, an artist, a craftsperson, a learned man, or a noble. Merchants and migrants first brought the teachings of the Holy Quran to India in the 7th century. Muslims regard the Quran as their holy book and accept the sovereignty of the one God Allah, whose love, mercy, and bounty embrace all those who believe in Him without regard to social backgrounds. Many rulers were patrons of Islam, and the ulama, learned theologians and jurists. And like Hinduism, Islam was interpreted in a variety of ways by its followers. There were the Shia Muslims who believed that the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law Ali was the legitimate leader of the Muslim community, and the Sunni Muslims who accepted the authority of the early leaders, caliphs of the community, and the succeeding caliphs. There were other important differences between the various schools of law, Hanafi and Shafi, mainly in India, and in theology and mystic traditions. Time also reflects changes in social and economic organization, in the persistence and transformation of ideas and beliefs. The study of time is made somewhat easier by dividing the past into large segments, periods that possesses shared characteristics. In the middle of the 19th century, that is around 1850s, British historians divided the history of India into three periods. Number 1 Hindu, number 2 Muslim, and number 3 British. This division was based on the idea that the religion of rulers was the only important historical change and that there were no other significant developments in the economy, society, and culture. Such a division also ignored the rich diversity of the subcontinent. Few historians follow this periodization today. Most look to economic and social factors to characterize the major elements of different moments of the past. The histories you read last year included a wide range of early stories, hunter gatherers, early farmers, people living in towns and villages, and early empires and kingdoms. The histories you will be studying this year are often described as medieval. You will find out more about the spread of peasant societies, the rise of regional and imperial state formations, sometimes at the cost of pastoral and forest people. The development of Hinduism and Islam is major religions, and the arrival of European trading companies. These uh, Moreover, the medieval period is often contrasted with the modern period. Modernity carries with it a sense of material progress and intellectual advancement. This seems to suggest that the medieval period was lacking in any change whatsoever. But of course, we know this was not the case. So that's all for chapter number 1. Let's start chapter number 2. Now let's start chapter number 2, New Kings and Kingdoms. Many new dynasties emerged after the 7th century. Map 1 shows the major ruling dynasties in different parts of the subcontinent between between the 7th and 12th centuries. So this is map 1, major kingdoms 7th to 12th centuries. So we have these fluctuating front lines. Locate the Purjara Pratiharas. Okay. So we have got Purjara Pratiharas. They're here. Then we have Rashtrakutas. They're here. Then Pallas. They're here. Then we have Cholas. They're here. And Jahamanas or Chauhans. Jahamanas or Chauhans, they're here. Can you identify the present day states over which they exercised control? Okay. Then Now let's come to the emergence of new dynasties. By the 7th century, there were big landlords or warrior chiefs in different regions of the subcontinent. Existing kings often acknowledged them as their subordinate or samantas. They were expected to bring gifts to their kings or overlords, be present at their court, and provide them with military support. As samantas gained power and wealth, they declared themselves to be Maha Samantas. Maha Mandaleshwara, the great lord of a circle or region, and so on. Sometimes they asserted their independence from their lords. One such instance was that of the Rashtrakutas in the Decans. Initially, they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka. In the mid 8th century, Dandi, Danti Durga, a Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiranya Garbha, literally the, the golden womb. When this ritual was performed with the help of Brahmanas, it was thought to lead to the rebirth of the sacrificer as a Kshatriya, even if he was not one by birth. So the figure number 1. This is wall relief from Cave 15, Ellora, showing Vishnu as Narasimha, the man lion. It is a work of the Rashtrakuta period. In other cases, men from enterprising families used their military skills to carve out kingdoms. For instance, the Kadamba Mayura Sharman and the Gujara Pratihara Harichandra were Brahmanas who gave up their traditional professions and took to arms, successfully establishing kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan respectively. Do you think being born as Kshatriya was important in order to become a ruler during this period? Administration in the kingdom. Many of these new kings adopted high sounding titles such as Maharaja Adhiraja, great king, overlord of kings, Tribhuvana Chakravartin, lord of the three worlds, and so on. However, in spite of such claims, they often shared power with their samantas as well as with associations of peasants, traders, and brahmanas. In each of these states, resources were obtained from the producers, that is, peasants, cattle keepers, artisans who were often persuaded or compelled to surrender part of what they produce. Sometimes there were claims as rent due to a lord who asserted that he owned the land. Revenue was also collected from traders. 400 taxes. 400 taxes. The inscriptions of the Cholas who ruled in Tamil Nadu refer to more than 400 terms for different kinds of taxes. The most frequently mentioned tax is veti, taken not in cash but in the form of forced labor, and kadamai or land revenue. There were also taxes on thatching the house, the use of ladder or climb palm trees, or the use of a ladder to climb palm trees, a sash on succession to family property, etc. Are any of such taxes collected today? These resources were used to finance the king's establishment as well as for the construction of temples and forts. They were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead to the acquisition of wealth in the form of plunder and access to land as well as trade routes. The functionaries for collecting revenue were gradually recruited from influential families, and position were often hereditary. This was true about the army as well. In many cases, close relatives of the king held these positions. In what ways was this form of administration different from the present day system? Prashantis and land grants. Prashantis contain details that may not be literally true, but they tell us how rulers wanted to depict themselves as valiant, victorious warriors, for example. These were composed by learned brahmanas who occasionally helped in the administration. The achievements of Nagabata. Many rulers described their achievements in prashastis. You read about the prashasti of the Gupta ruler Samudragupta last year. One prashasti written in Sanskrit and found in Gwalior, Madhya Pradesh, describes the exploits of Nagabhata, a Pratihara king, as follows. The kings of Andhra, Sendhava, Sindh, Vidarbha, part of Maharashtra, and Kalinga, part of Odisha, fell before him even as he was a prince. He won a victory over Chakrayuddha, the ruler of Kannauj. He defeated the king of Vanga, part of Bengal, Anartha, part of Gujarat, Malava, part of Madhya Pradesh, Kirata, forest peoples, Turushka, Turks, Vatsa, Matsya, both kingdoms in North India. See if you can find some of the areas mentioned in the inscription on map 1. Other rulers made similar claims as well. Why do you think they made these claims? Kings often rewarded brahmanas by grants of land. These were recorded on copper plates, which were given to those who received the land. So, this is a set of copper plates recording a grant of land made by a ruler in the 9th century, written partly in Sanskrit and partly in Tamil. The ring holding the plates together is secured with the royal seal to indicate that this is an authentic document. What was given with the land? This is part of the Tamil section of a land grant given by the Cholas. We have demarcated the boundaries of the land by making earthen embankments as well as by planting thorny bushes. This is what the land contains: fruit bearing trees, water, land, gardens and orchards, trees, wells, open spaces, pasture land, a village, ant hills, platforms, canals, ditches, rivers, silt laden land, tanks, granaries, fish ponds, beehives, and deep lakes. He who receives the land can collect taxes from it. He can collect the taxes imposed by judicial officers as fines. The tax on betel leaves that on woven cloth as well as on vehicles. He can build he can build large rooms with upper stories made of baked bricks. He can get large and small wells dug. He can plant trees and thorny bushes. If necessary, he can get canals constructed for irrigation. He should ensure that water is not wasted and that embankments are built. List all the possible sources of irrigation mentioned in the inscription and discuss how these might have been used. Unusual of the 12th century was a poem long Sanskrit poem containing the history of kings who ruled over Kashmir. It was composed by an author named Kalhana. He used a variety of sources, including inscriptions, documents, eyewitness accounts, and earlier histories, to write his account. Unlike the writers of Prashantis, he was often critical about rulers and their policies. Warfare for wealth. You may have noticed that each of these ruling dynasties, was based in a specific region. At the same time, they tried to control other areas. One particular prized area was the city of Kannauj in the Ganga Valley. For centuries, rulers belonging to the Gurjara Pratihara rulers belonging to the Gurjara Pratihara, Rashtrakuta, and Palla dynasties fought for control over Kannauj. Because there were three parties in this long drawn conflict, historians often describe it as the tripartite struggle. It would be Gurjara Pratihara, number 2 Rashtrakuta, number 3 Palla. Look at map 1 and suggest reasons why these rulers wanted to control Kannauj and the Ganga Valley. As we will see, rulers also tried to demonstrate their power and resources by building large temples. So when they attacked one another's kingdoms, they often chose to target temples which were sometimes extremely rich. You will read more about this in chapter 5. One of the best known of such rulers is Sultan Muhammad of Ghazni, Afghanistan. He ruled from 1997 to 1030 and extended control over parts of Central Asia, Iran, and the northwestern part of the subcontinent. He raided the subcontinent almost every year. Almost every year. His targets were wealthy temples, including that of the Somnath, Gujarat. Much of the wealth Mahmud carried away was used to create a splendid capital city of Ghazni. He was interested in finding out more about the people he conquered and entrusted a scholar named Al Biruni to write an account of the subcontinent. This Arabic work, known as the Kitab al-Hind, remains an important source for historians. He consulted Sanskrit scholars to prepare this account. Other kings who engaged in warfare include the Jahamanas, later known as Chauhans, who ruled over the region around Delhi and Ajmer. They attempted to extend their control to the and the east, west and the east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and the Gahadavilas of western Uttar Pradesh. The best known Jahamana ruler was Prithviraj III, 1168 to 1192, who defeated an Afghan ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191 but lost to him the very next year, 1192. The best known Jahamana ruler was Prithviraj III, 1168 to 1192, who defeated an Afghan ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191 but lost to him the very next year in 1192. Look at map 1 again and discuss why the Jahamanas may have wanted to expand their territories. A closer look, the Cholas. So these are fluctuating frontiers. Then the Chola kingdom and its neighbors. Okay. From Urayur to Thanjavur. How did the Cholas rise to power? A minor chief family known as the Muttarayar held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate to the Pallava kings of Kanchipuram. Vijayalaya, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas from Urayur, captured the delta from the Muttarayar in the middle of the 9th century. He built the town of Thanjavur and a temple for goddess Nishumbhashudini here. Okay, a minor chiefly family known as the Muttarayar held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate to the Pallava kings of Kanchipuram. Vijayalaya, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas from Urayur, captured the delta from the Muttarayar in the middle of the 9th century. He built the town of Thanjavur, Vijayalaya, and a temple for goddess Nishumbhashudini there. The successors of Vijayalaya conquered neighboring regions and the kingdom grew in size and power. The Pandyas and the Pallava territories to the south and north were made part of this kingdom. Okay. Raja I, considered the most powerful Chola ruler, became king in 985 and expanded control over most of these areas. He also reorganized the administration of the empire. Raja's son Rajendra I continued his policies and even raided the Ganga Valley, Sri Lanka, and countries of Southeast Asia, developing a navy for these expeditions. So it was Raja I and Rajendra I. They expanded the Chola Empire. splendid temples and bronze sculpture. The big temples of Thanjavur. The big temp, uh, the big temples of Thanjavur and Gangaikonda, Cholapuram, built by Raja and Rajendra I, are architectural and sculptural marvels. Chola temples often became the nuclei Chola temples often became the nuclei of settlements which grew around them. These were centers of crafts production. Temples were also endowed with land by rulers as well as by others. The produce of this land went to maintain all the specialists who worked at the temple and very often lived near it, like priests, garland makers, cooks, sweepers, musicians, dancers, etc. So, this image, figure 3, the temple of Gangai Konda Cholapuram. Notice the way in which the roof tapers. Also look at the elaborate stone sculptures used to decorate the outer walls. This is a magnificent temple. In other words, temples were not only places of worship, they were the hub of economic, social, and cultural life as well. So, this figure number 4, a Chola bronze sculpture. Notice how carefully it is decorated. To find out how these images were made, see chapter 6. So, this is Chola bronze sculpture. Okay. Chola bronze sculpture. Amongst the crafts associated with temples, the making of bronze images was the most distinctive. Chola bronze images are considered amongst the finest in the world. While most images were of deities, sometimes images were made of devotees as well. Culture and irrigation. Many of the achievements of the Cholas were made possible through new developments in agriculture. Look at map 2 again. Notice that the river Kaveri branches off into several small channels before emptying into the Bay of Bengal. These channels overflow frequently, depositing fertile soil on their banks. Water from the channels also provide the necessary moisture for agriculture, particularly the cultivation of rice. Although agriculture had developed earlier in other parts of Tamil Nadu, it was also from the 5th or 6th century that this area was opened up for large-scale cultivation. Forests had to be cleared in some regions, land had to be leveled in other areas. In the delta region, embankments had to be built to prevent flooding, and canals had to be constructed to carry water to the fields. In many areas, 2 crops were grown in a year. So, figure number 5, a 9th century sluice gate in Tamil Nadu. It regulated the outflow of water from a tank into the channels that irrigated the fields. In many cases, it was necessary to water crops artificially. A variety of methods were used for irrigation. In some areas, wells were dug. In other places, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. Remember that irrigation works require planning, organizing labor and resources, maintaining these works, and deciding on how water is to be shared. Most of the new rulers, as well as people living in villages, took an active interest in these activities. The administration of the empire. How was the administration organized? Settlements of peasants, known as became prosperous with the spread of irrigation agriculture. Groups of such villages formed large units called Nadu. The village council and the Nadu had several administrative functions, including dispensing justice and collecting taxes. Rich peasants of the Velala caste exercised considerable control over the affairs of the Nadu under the supervision of the central Chola government. The Chola kings gave some rich landowners titles like Movenda Velan, a Velan or peasant serving three kings. The Chola kings gave some rich landowners titles like Movenda Velan, a Velan or merchant serving three kings, Arayar, chief, etc., as markers of respect and entrusted them with important offices of the state at the center. Types of land. Chola inscriptions mention several categories of land. So the first one is Valan Vagai, land of non-Brahmana peasant proprietors. Then number 2 we are going to have Brahmadeya, land gifted to Brahmanas. Third one we are going to have Shala Bhoga, land of the maintenance of a school. Then number 4 Devadana, Tiruna Mattukani, land gifted to temples. The last one Palichandam, land donated to Jain's institutions. So there are 5 types of land. Chola inscriptions mention several categories of land. Okay, there's several. Number 1 we have Velan Vagai, land of non-Brahmana peasant proprietors. Number 2 Brahmadeya, land gifted to Brahmanas. Number 3 Shala Bhoga, land for the maintenance of a school. Then Devadana, Tiruna Mattukani, land gifted to temples. Then Palichandam, land donated to Jain's institutions. We have seen that Brahmanas often received land grants. They often received land grants or Brahmadeya. As a result, a large number of Brahmana settlements emerged in the Kaveri Valley as in other parts of South India. Each Brahmadeya was looked after by an assembly or sabha of prominent Brahmana landholders. These assemblies worked very efficiently. Their decisions were recorded in detail in inscriptions, often on the stone walls of temples. Associations of traders, known as Nagarams, also occasionally performed administrative functions in towns. Inscriptions from Uttara Merur in Chingleput district, Tamil Nadu, provide details of the way in which the sabha was organized. The Sabha had separate committees to look after irrigation works, gardens, temples, etc. Names of those eligible to be members of these committees were written in small tickets of palm leaf and kept in an earthenware pot, from which a young boy was asked to pick the tickets, one by one, for each committee. Inscriptions and text. The working of a sabha according to the Uttaramerud inscription. All those who wish to become members of the sabha should be owners of land from which land revenue is collected. They should have their own homes. They should be between 35 and 70 years of age. They should have knowledge of the Vedas. They should be well versed in administrative matters and honest. If anyone has been a member of any committee in the last 3 years, he cannot become a member of another committee. Anyone who has not submitted his accounts as well as those of his relatives cannot contest the elections. Do you think women participated in these assemblies? Do your view, in your view, are lotteries useful in choosing members of committees? While inscriptions tell us about kings and powerful men, here is an excerpt from the Peraya Puranam, a 12th century Tamil work which informs us about the lives of ordinary men and women. On the outskirts of Adanur was a small hamlet of Pulayars, a name used for a social group considered outcast by Brahmanas and Velalas, studded with small huts under old thatches and inhabited by agrarian laborers engaged in menial occupations. In the thresholds in the thresholds of the huts covered with stripes of leather, little chickens moved about in groups. Dark children who wore bracelets of black iron were prancing about, carrying little puppies. In the shed of the Marudu Arjuna trees, a female laborer put her baby to sleep on a sheet of leather. There were mango trees from whose branches drums were hanging, and under the coconut palms, in little hollows on the ground, tiny headed bitches lay after whelping. The red crested rocks, the red crested cocks crowd before dawn, calling the brownie pulayar, plural, to their day's work, and by day, under the shade of the kanji tree, upspread the voice of the wavy-haired Pulaya women singing as they were husking paddy. Were there any Brahmanas in the hamlet? Described all the activities that were taking place in the village. Do you think temple inscriptions ignore these activities? China under the Tang Dynasty. In China, an empire was established under the Tang Dynasty, which remained in power for about 300 years, from the 7th to the 10th centuries. Its capital, Jian, was one of the largest cities in the world, visited by Turks, Iranians, Indians, Japanese, and Koreans. The Tang Empire was administered by a bureaucracy recruited through an examination which was open to all who wished to appear for it. The system of selecting official remained in place with some changes till 1911. In what ways was this system different from those prevalent in the Indian subcontinent? Imagine you are present in an election for a sabha. Describe what you see and hear. Now let's start the match the following. Number 1. Gurjara Pratiharas in Gujarat and Rajasthan. Number 2. Rashtrakutas in Western Deccan. Number 3. Pallas in Bengal. Number 4. Cholas in Tamil Nadu. Then keywords Samanta, temple, Nadu, and Sabha. So that's all, guys. See you in my next video. Bye.